where do we find the 12-step Demartini addiction? Now, I can't give it out per se, but I can give you the first 3 steps anyway. So if we do, so with an addiction, I mean, there's a number of different components with addiction. Part of it can be when you're doing something you perceive to be pleasurable or an addiction, there's a lot of benefit in it. So the first step is listing as many benefits, 150 benefits of the actual addiction itself. So if it's alcohol, what's the benefit of drinking? And benefit. You look at the 7 areas of life. You look at your values, which is top 3, so that's 10. So if you're looking at 150, you're looking at roughly, whatever, 10-ish, 12-ish per area of life. So that's a lot of benefits. So essentially you do that, and then you go, okay, so then you've got to find viable alternatives to get the same outcome, because we won't, if we don't have another strategy to get the same outcome that we get, let's say, for example, it relaxes you and you're like, oh, I feel so much more relaxed. And you don't have another strategy for relaxation but drinking, you're going to go to drinking. But if you've got options, and the more options we have, the more flexibility we have with our choices and our decisions, therefore you're going to be more able to go and actually do that. So you create lots of different viable alternatives that actually would work for you. There's no point saying I'll go and meditate if you've never meditated in your life and you have no interest in it. You have to find something that you genuinely would like to do and start doing. So you do that. So those two steps are really important. Then you reorder those steps. The viable alternatives, because you might find that with the 5, you're writing 5 viable alternatives for every 150 benefits. So you're going to have a massive amount, 150 viable alternatives. Then you have to organize them. This is where a spreadsheet comes in handy. You would then organize them to see what viable alternatives come up the most, because then you start doing those things as well. And that will help to give you just more options and more freedom. The other component when it comes to addiction is that's super important when you're thinking about addiction is the pleasure. You move towards pleasure. There has to be some kind of pain thing that you're trying to hide, run away from, avoid. And so it's about really truly digging into what that pain point is, and if it's like the pain of work, for example, that's super stressful, and then you want to have the relaxation at the end of the day because it just feels so relaxing, and then that becomes the pleasure because the pain of the work is so intense. Then it's like you can look at the drawbacks of drinking. You could try and shift that. You could have all the viable alternatives if you wanted to look at that as well. But then if you don't shift the pain that's actually the problem underneath the problem that's creating the addiction in the first place, then nothing will change. And so you want to look at what's the, and shift that, what's the benefit of whatever you're perceiving to be painful, so that you can actually then dissolve this dynamic over here that's creating the addiction in the first place. So often people come and say, I've got an addiction with, drugs. Okay, great. What's the pain point in your life right now that you're trying to avoid? And let's work on that first, before we go into, all the other stuff and working through the addiction, because it's like the root cause. So I find that really interesting, and definitely interesting because people have addictions with food. They have addictions. Well, we just talked about that one with sex. They have addictions with maybe even money or gambling or even maybe an addiction sometimes to dating new people. It comes in many different forms, and so it's just looking at those 2 components I talked about before. It can be definitely helpful to start to shift and change your awareness with addiction. So you can, thank you, Deb, has said that if you do want to actually go through the 12 steps of clearing an addiction through the Demartini process, then you can buy it online at the Demartini Institute. He has all 12 steps. You can go through all of them. I've just given you a couple that can be helpful in terms of like the dynamic.